Okay, good. All right. So that's a continual lecture. So basically that we, in our last lecture, we learned about this cell, this muscle cell, because we learned about the skeletal muscle cells like last week. This week, we move on to another group of muscle cells. This is the cardiomyocyte. That's like a special term for it, cardiomyocyte. And these cells, they contract. There are two unique ways that one is that their action potential coming from their action potential has a plateau. This plateau represents the influx of calcium from the extracellular space. So that's first thing. The second thing is that all these cells, all these muscle cells are connected. So it's not like skeletal muscle cells that each muscles are separated from each other. So we can control precise movement because we can control that different muscle to be moved separately. But heart is different. Heart, basically all these muscle cells are all grouped. So all these muscle cells are all connected together. So they are not separate. When one cell got excited, all cells got excited because their membrane basically connect with each other. So when one membrane got excited, generate the action potential, that action potential will travel to the entire chamber. So this is a chamber, the entire chamber, all the cells. Only one get excited, all cells got excited. So when all cells got excited, they contract. So they can synchronize contraction all together. So when they contract together, they produce a big force. And they also produce a very big action potential overall. So if it's only one cell, say we move the muscle, we move one muscle, that must have one action potential. But that is only from that muscle, that group of muscle. If we move more muscle, we basically, if we synchronize it, we generate a bigger action potential. And in the heart is that every time they contract together, there are hundreds to thousands of cells excited all together. And so the overall action potential is huge. And it's very much like, let me do this one here. So before I move to that slides, I want to show you one thing. That let me do this one here. Okay, so it's very much like. So here is. Let's see. Can see this one here. Sorry. So here, I want to have a drawing here. Okay. So it's very much like, say we have, this is the atrium, this is the ventricle. So in the atrium, we have all different muscle cells, but each one, when we have the action potential are created throughout the entire atrium. So we will have a sum of all cells excite together. So here we will have in the atrium, we will have in this entire cells, we will have the action potential, this action potential generate from the entire chamber. And in this action potential, the unique part is that it has the depolarization, a plateau, and the repolarization. Here is depolarization. and the repolarization. So you can consider that if it's only one muscle change, it doesn't really affect our, it generates action potential only in that region. But say you have the whole heart, whole chamber that excited generate this action potential. This action potential gonna generate, this action potential gonna generate from the entire chamber. And we will have, from our body, we will have, see this as a very big, like an earthquake. Hi, Rex.
Oh, hey.
Hey. It's
What's
like,
that?
yeah, good.
Are you recording right now? You're recording it, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I am recording. Yeah, double check. Okay, let's see. Pause recording. Yes, I am recording. Good. Last time I did record too, but yeah, but it's only like I missed the very early part. But thank you for reminding. So here is very important. I want to make this one very clear, that the whole chamber, when they generate this action potential, is very much like earthquake. So in the beginning, this entire atrium has not zero, resting memory potential about -70 millivolt. And then the entire chamber got excited all together. It will change from -70 to about 0. So it's like it will generate like center of the earthquake. It will move very bigly, jump from -70 to 0 and stay there. So this jump will generate, so this is, say this is the body, okay, this is the body. Here, when it generated exponential, it will generate very much like a earthquake. You saw the wave, this jump from the -7 to the 0 will travel across the entire body, and can be detected by our electrode. If we put electrode here, we will see it. So in the beginning, this electrode will detect here. It will be resting, like there is no earthquake. But if the action potential jump from -70 to 0, this depolarization, it will be detected as a wave. And then it will stay here as the depolarized, as a plateau, and the calcium flowing, but it doesn't really change that much. And then following that, say about 0.2 seconds later, it will repolarize. The whole chamber repolarize together. So this will also, is like Earth will generate another wave. It can be detected in the electrode again as a wave. So during this time, the depolarization and repolarization can be detected by our EKG. And so in our EKG, we will have, let me do this one here. We will have because the atrium generate one action potential, followed by the, let me do the other side. Slide, okay. So in atrium, so we have the atrium and the ventricle. Okay, so atrium generate one action potential, followed by the ventricle generate another action potential. So the atrium action potential will be detected as a wave. Then the atrium, so this atrium, so this ventricle. And then atrium repolarization cause another wave. Then the ventricle, our ventricle is much larger than the atrium. So this depolarization we will have another wave followed by the ventricle repolarization, another wave. And if we have this all together, we will have a P wave. This is QRS and T. So that is the transition from the action potential of the atrium and the ventricle into ECG. Hi, Anna.
Hello.
Hi. You might need to mute it because your background is a little bit strong.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay. Thank you so much. So that is the action potential from atrium and the ventricle. This is how does this like physiological change to be converted to EKG or ECG. Any questions so far? So what you really need to know in a common like examination or like a test, you probably would see is that people would ask, what is P represent? What the QRS represent? What T represent? The P will represent the depolarization of atrium. QRS will represent the depolarization of the ventricle because it's combination of depolarization of the ventricle plus the repolarization of atrium. However, the atrium is much smaller than the ventricle. So if we have the atrium, if we get the chance to look at the heart, you can see probably like the majority, maybe this is only 1/5 size of the ventricle. So even though this wave is a mix of atrium repolarization and the ventricle depolarization, the majority coming from the ventricular depolarization. And then we have the T wave. The T wave represent the repolarization of ventricle. So that's the action potential, that's the connection of action potential and the EKG or ECG. Okay, is that clear? Okay.
So P is the depolarization of atrium, QRS is the depolarization of ventricle, and T is the repolarization of ventricle.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Even though we don't have a quiz here, but if there's a quiz, this is very easy, like a topic to be the question, like what's P? The option could be repolarization of the atrium, depolarization of atrium, the contraction of the atrium, or the contraction of ventricle. Contraction is this period, because during this period, calcium coming in. And during this period, calcium coming in. Calcium coming in. So that's when the muscle does the contraction. However, this wave is the beginning of that contraction, is the depolarization or the repolarization, but not that contraction. Good?
So, Professor?
Yes.
So the influx of calcium
yes.
is related to the delay or the plateau period of the whole thing, right?
The calcium influx is delay, is that duration of the plateau
okay.
of Yes, the duration of plateau.
Okay.
That means that during that duration, muscle
The
receives
muscle is
that
contracting.
calcium.
Okay.
And the calcium is needed for myosin and actin bind together to conduct the contraction.
Okay, good.
So this is the beginning. This will be the excitation. This will be the
The
contraction.
contraction. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. So we get the very basic there. I mean, this is a very basic portion, how muscle works. Basically, we learned that muscle action potential, and because it's not a single cell contraction, it's a whole group contract together. So we will have a very, very large summed signal from our atrium and ventricle, and that can be detected as the EKG in our body. So that's the very basic portion, like a fundamental part of heart muscle. Then that next step is to talk about these electric conduction. Because the thing about the heart is that the heart muscle contract not by our mental motor neuron. In our skeletal muscle, upper motor neuron talk to the lower motor neuron, and the lower motor neuron send out axon to excite this muscle. But the heart is different. Heart contract by itself. So it has its own conductive system. So that's right here. So that's this conductive system. So this conductive system has this SA node and the AB node. So SA node will excite both left and right atrium, send to the AV node, and the AV node send out signal through the hist bundle of hist to Purkinje fibers to both left and right ventricles. So that's the electric conduction. So the SA node is the major one to generate the pacemaker, generate the impulse. So basically, this SA node has this membrane potential as -70, but it gradually depolarize, reach the threshold, generate action potential, and do the resting, but it gradually depolarize, hit the restrictor again, generate action potential. So that's the SA node. It will generate action potential, and it will send out signal to both left and right atrium. And then this SA node will send signal to the AV node. From AV toward this hist bundle will have about 0.2 second delay. So 0.16, about 0.2 second. That's because that AV, the function of AV is to excite both left and the right ventricle. So it has to wait for about 0.2 seconds wait until the finish of the atrium contraction. So here we will have SA node, generate action potential in the atrium. This one will take about 0.2 seconds. So this is triggered by the SA node. And the AV node have to wait until that 0.2 seconds. Then AV node jump into trigger another action potential to the ventricle. So that has to have about 0.2 or 0.16 second delay. And that will lead to that here we have P, QRS, T. So this P, QRS, and T. This PR interval is about 0.2 seconds. That would be the very important measure in the EKG to see whether this delay is about 0.2 seconds. So there is delay in the AV node. So here is the overall conductive system from the SA to both left and right atrium, to the AV, to the through the bundle of His Purkinje fibers, to both left and right ventricle. So that's the electric. So this is the electric conduction of heart. Is there any questions? Good. See, here we have something quite tricky. That is that in the very beginning, we learned about heart. Heart has how many chambers? 4. 4, good, thank you so much, Rex. 4 chambers. This 4 chamber has blood to go through, right? Good. And this blood goes through a sequence. Can someone tell me what's the sequence of that blood goes through into these 4 chambers?
Right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle.
Good. So it's from the right atrium to right ventricle and left atrium to left ventricle, then go to the body. So that's the blood flow. And so it will be, blood will be right atrium to right ventricle to left atrium to left ventricle, left ventricle. So that is the blood. But the contraction is different. Contraction is not right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. The contraction is left, right atrium contract together, and the right, left ventricle contract together. So that's the tricky part, that contraction and the blood flow have different sequence. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the cardiac cycle. So basically cardiac cycle, we are going to talk about the diastole and the systole. Diastole is that when the heart is relaxed. So relaxed. Systole is heart is contracting. So that's this cardiac cycle, basically heart. And this one basically driven by the SA node. So when SA sends signal to AV, and during this time, the atrium contract to the AV, bundle of His to Purkinje fibers. And here is a contraction of ventricle. So here we have atrium contraction, ventricle contraction. All these are driven by the SA node. So we will learn about it. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right. So, oh, by the way, let's talk about this one first. So Eec Gpr interval, that's important, as we mentioned earlier. So if you have this one, so this one represent what?
Depolarization of atrium.
That's right. Thank you so much. QRS.
Depolarization.
And
Of
repolarization.
ventricle, yeah.
So this one, basically, if there's a question, choose this one because repolarization of atrium is very little
Yeah.
compared to this. So the majority is depolarization of ventricle. And how about this one?
Repolarization of ventricle.
That's right. Thank you so much. Repolarization of ventricle. So that's that. And the depolarization of atrium and the depolarization of ventricle takes about 0.2 second delay. If it's longer, then there is a first degree heart block. But you don't need to remember this clinical term. You just need to remember that there is this PR interval means there is the delay from the depolarization of atrium and the depolarization of ventricle. So here is again this conduction system from the SA node to the AV node. Here we have a delay of about 0.2 seconds to bundle of his, to Purkinje fibers, to left and right ventricle. One thing that you need to know, okay, let me ask you, okay, but I can just tell you. One thing you need to know that even though this is the electric conduction, this is not neuron. So this is not nerve. This is muscle. This SA node fiber, the AV node fiber, these are all cardiac muscle. They just don't contract. Both muscle and the nerve are excitable. So they both have that function to generate, meaning that they can generate action potential. And so this is part of nerve, part of muscle, this part of muscle, and they have tendency to produce a rhythmic impulse from the SA node to the AV node. Something like that. So yeah. Okay, so that's the electric conduction system. Purkinje fibers is the one that travel into the left and right ventricle. So just one thing that both this concept also mentioned in our lab that all this have tendency to generate action potential. So SA node, AV node, Purkinje fibers, it just SA node. So all this can have tendency to generate rhythmic impulse. AV node can generate rhythmic impulse. And Purkinje fiber also can generate rhythmic impulse. It's just their frequency is different. So SA node is the fastest one. AV node is slower. Purkinje fiber is even slower. So that when SA is very much like a teacher asking students that, who want this candy? And all this raise your hand. They want the candy, but there's only one candy. So the SA node, because it raised hand first, it will get the candy. And when it generates this action potential, it would travel. It would travel to AV and to the entire heart. So others will be dominated by SA node, even though they have a tendency to generate action potential, but before they generate their own action potential, their actions are dominated by the SA node. That's why the SA node is called the pacemaker. Pacemaker. It generates this pace. However, yes, you got a question? No? Okay, good. So however, if this SA node is injured, say our atrium is entire failure, then this AV node, because it was before dominated by the SA node, now it's not. AV can generate, then it generates its own action potential. It will still be able to travel to the ventricle and conduct the heart contraction. So, so if this region is affected, AV will take it over. If AV is affected, Purkinje fiber will take it over. The heart can still contract, but just with a slower rate. Did you guys did the lab already?
Try to.
Okay. So this was talked about in the lab, that the SA node, Purkinje fibers, all of those have the capacity to generate rhythmic impulse. But SA node is the fastest one. Yes, got a question?
Yeah, sorry. So you said if the SA node fails, the AV node will step in and take over, right?
Yes.
And if the AV node fails, the Purkinje fibers could take over.
That's right.
So the heart can still pump and do everything it needs to do just off of the Purkinje fibers? Or the other two can completely be dead?
Say again?
The other two can completely be dead? Like, and you can just survive off of that?
Yes.
Wow.
Because the thing is that the heart muscle are connected. So as long as they got one of the cell got excited, the whole heart will get excited and they can contract. And then it can produce the blood into the body. So you probably won't even notice the difference.
Divine intervention.
Yeah.
How long can like the Purkinje fibers do all that work till the heart stops?
Usually like 10 seconds, 20 seconds.
That's it?
Yes.
And
then that say the SA node generate a pulse, like 1 pulse per second. So that would cause the heart rate about 60 beats per minute. 1 pulse per second. AV is about 40 pulse per second. This one Purkinje fiber is about 1 pulse per about 30 seconds. This one is 1 pulse per about 10 seconds. So during the first second, it was waiting for the SA, but there is no SA. 10 seconds later, there is still no SA. The AV will start to build that potential. So 10, 20 seconds later, if the heart still not receive any impulse, this potential will wake up and it will generate its impulse. And that 10, 20 seconds is good enough because say our brain, if we suffocate or if we stop blood flow for about 20 seconds, the neuronal will still be alive. So you just need to provide the oxygen into your brain in about 20, sometimes some people say even like 3 hours. If if somebody has a stroke for about 30 minutes to say 3 hours, that the region of brain doesn't have blood flow. If you provide that blood flow, that brain region can still be alive. So, any questions? Good. So the key here is that all this area has the tendency to generate rhythmic impulse. All this can generate. It's just a different rate. So that's this one here, rhythmic, intrinsic rhythmical rate. SA is faster, the AV is slower.
So you can survive just off the Purkinje fibers discharge only? You can survive off that?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So SA is that, AV is that, Purkinje. But there is caveat. That is that you can survive, but when you need more cardiac output, meaning that when you are running, when you are exercising, when your body need to push the heart jump faster, say if you are resting, your heart rate probably say 100 or 80 beats per minute. But when you start to run, your heart rate should adapt to provide about 120 to 130 beats per minute in order to keep your body running. And because if you are solely rely on the Purkinje fiber, you won't be able to produce that kind of heart rate. The fastest one will be 30, 40. And so you will feel very exhausted because your heart cannot pump that fast. But you can still survive. You just don't, if you don't do like a very stressful exercise, you should be okay. Any questions? Okay. So the blockage, so this one basically saying that if the SA node is damaged, or usually the damaged part is a bundle of his, because this one is only one, like a nerve, like a fiber. So if this region got injured, then AV cannot send signal. So it's either that this region is injured or this region injured will be AV, or the Purkinje fiber will take it over, generate. They will become a new pacemaker. So that's this concept, that is the Stokes-Adams syndrome, that if there is a block of the AV, then about 5 to 20 seconds later, Purkinje will take it over, and the people can still survive. Any questions? So that's the conducting system.
Would you know when one of them fails, like your AV node fails or something?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. So the question is that, would you know, right? Yeah. How would you know, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So remember that we measure, what we can measure is something, say heart rate, right? Or we can do EKG. Remember?
Mm-hmm.
So this is EKG. EKG, we have the P, the typical EKG is P, Q, R, S, and the T.
Right.
Right? If there's no P, then you will see something like this. You will see something like this. So it will be no P, QRS, and the T. And no P, QRS, and the T. And with that, you will know that you have the heart block, because your AV node doesn't cause the contraction of the atrium. So you will know. So the way to know it is to do an EKG and to see whether you have a repeat PQRST, PQRST.
But would you feel it?
You will probably won't feel it unless you start to run. Yeah, you probably won't feel it. A lot of people has it's so-called atrial fibrillation.
AFib.
yeah. And a lot of people have that and they don't know. They can live a normal life until they may one day, there is a tendency of this person, if the atrium is not functioning, say this is atrium, sorry. Say this is the atrium, this is the ventricle, atrium, ventricle. Say if the atrium is not functioning, only the ventricle, because the Purkinje fiber only excites ventricle, not atrium. So when you can still live without atrium, but only ventricle. However, this kind of person will have some kind of the, let me see, what do I have here? Joy. Some kind of blood stagnant, because here the blood is gonna stay because it's not moving. It will move, but very slowly, because it will passively move, but very slowly. And this in the blood stagnant will cause. We talk about it. What this will cause?
A clot?
Clot, that's right. Who will say that?
Holly?
Holly, thank you so much. Holly, you deserve a point. All right, so blood stagnant will cause blood clot. And that will cause thrombosis, and that thrombosis will form and will circulate in the body. And one day it probably got stuck in the heart or in the brain. And you go to the hospital, they measure your EKG and realize that, okay, you have atrium fibrillation. So unless that, until then, you probably won't even notice.
You said if there's no P, there's no what?
If there's no P, there is no atrium. Atrium depolarization means that atrium is not pump. And this is called the atrial fibrillation. Yeah.
Okay.
So the way to detect the AF is to measure whether you have the P or not. If you constantly don't have the P, then your atrium is not contracting, which in a way you still can live, because ventricle contract and that's strong enough to provide 80% of the blood for the regular daily activity.
Right, and it's only detectable by EKG or overexertion.
That's right. Okay. So let's talk about the systole and the diastole. So basically that here we are going to, so let's go through this one. Basically that in the beginning, so we have, let's say we have the atrium depolarization followed by the ventricle depolarization. This one take about 0.2 seconds. And then there will be a period of time from here to here, another atrium depolarization and the ventricle depolarization. So here we will have the P, QRS, and the T here, another P, QRS, and the T. So that's P, QRS, and the T is P, QRS, and the T. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so this will be before any contraction like this during this period of time. This one will be about say 0.4 seconds, something like that. During this period of time, there is no muscle contraction because there's no action potential in both atrium and the ventricle. During this time, blood coming out from our body flow in. Use another color. Use blue because this is deoxygenated blood. So this blood coming from our body flow in into the right atrium freely because our body has blood pressure. So that pressure will push this blood go in. However, at this point, nothing is contract. So blood can freely go in all the way from the atrium to ventricle and start to build up to about 80%. And the same thing here, from lung, going into the left atrium to the left ventricle, start to build up. So it will build up during this time, without any contraction, they will build up about 80% of the blood of the ventricle. So that's this time. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have what? We have the atrium contraction, right? Then we have the atrium contraction, this one here or this one here. So after that, we have the atrium contraction. This atrium will squeeze. They will start to squeeze. And when they squeeze, they will push another about 20% of the blood into the ventricle. So make it a full like 100%. And so that is the, it's called the filling, ventricular filling period. That blood fill into the ventricle. Any questions? So this one leads to the concept that we mentioned earlier. If the atrium doesn't contract at all, the ventricle still store 80% of the blood. The atrium contraction only help with this extra 20% of the blood. So even without atrium contraction, people won't notice it because that 80% is good enough for the regular daily life. So that's that. We go all the way from here to here, okay, to here. So atrium contract, blood fill in. And then following that is ventricle contraction. So that's this one here. So basically this one is that this is the ventricle volume. It was 0, fill up to about 80%. And then this is, so this resting time. And then here is P, squeeze another 20% to make it 100%. So here it is 80%, this is 20%, make it 100%. So atrium make it, contraction make it full. And following that is the QRS is the ventricular contraction. Now following that is the ventricle. So here is this one here. So let's say ventricle. So in the beginning, ventricle is relaxed. So during this time, ventricle is left and right ventricle is relaxed. Atrium is relaxed. And so the blood going in, fill it to about 20%. 80%, sorry, 80%. 80%. And then atrium contract to fill it to another 20%. So this is 20%. And then, so that we finish that. So during this time, this one is called diastole. This diastole means ventricular diastole. It doesn't contract yet. Then ventricle start to contract. When ventricle, so here is, sorry. So we have this one resting up to here before ventricle contraction. And then ventricle contract. I just skip this slide. I think this slide is too, don't worry about that one. So let's just follow from here. So atrium contract, and then it's ventricle contract. Ventricle contract. So ventricle contract. The first thing ventricle does is that when it contracts, here we have this AV valve. AV valve. So when it contracts, it first is before it was open, then it contract, it will close it up. It will close it up. This one is the outside blood going in. When this is resting, blood can freely open the door going in. But when the ventricle contract, it push it back. It closes this valve. So during the very first couple milliseconds, this ventricle contraction doesn't make the blood going out. It first closes the AV valve. So this one closes the AV valve. Close it, and then it starts to build this pressure to push open the aortic or pulmonary artery valve. Push it open. Then we have the squeeze of the blood from the ventricle, left ventricle, and the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery and the aorta into the body. So that's the ventricular systole, ventricular contraction.
So in diastole, you said the ventricle is filling?
Yes.
And diastole and systole is when it pumps out through the aorta.
The second part, can you repeat? I didn't.
And I said, for systole, you said that's when the ventricle is pumping out, it's contracting through the aorta?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Any questions? So that basically summarizes it. We have the, we learned about this atrium action potential followed by the ventricular action potential, and then we have some time of resting. And then we have another atrium and the ventricle action potential, or we can put it here. So this is resting. During the resting, before ventricle contraction, this one is diastole. Basically blood filled into the ventricle. Ventricle is the major pump to provide blood into the body. So before it contract, is diastole. It basically blood going in to start to fill. And then it contract. This contraction has two periods. The first period is called isometric contraction because when it contracts, it first is close all the valve. And then it builds that pressure to push the blood into aorta. Now the question is that, do you guys know what our blood pressure is about? What's the range?
170.
Say again?
120 over 80.
120 over 80.
Oh, blood
okay?
pressure.
Blood pressure, yes, blood pressure. So basically when we measure the blood pressure in the large artery, it's very similar like the blood pressure in the aorta. So in our body, this blood pressure is in the range of 120 to 80. And when the ventricle is resting, the pressure here is low. During this time, the pressure here is about 0. So when it contracts, they have to build up this pressure to be larger than 80 in order to push it out. So otherwise this valve will be closed because the outside has larger pressure, 120 to 80, to push it back, to close it. And the ventricle has to generate that impulse, that contrast large enough to push it against 120 and 80 in order to push the blood out. Okay, good. All right. So that is that's just, don't worry about this one here because I think that's this two figure is good enough. This one and this one, good enough to describe this. So I think this one is also a repeat. That blood going in, pressure build, push it out. Ventricular ejection, basically that when it contracts, it will eject the blood out. Here are some terminology that is commonly used in the heart, such as the ejection fraction. So basically that when the blood fill in the heart, they don't eject it all out. They don't eject it all out. They will eject only about a portion of it. So the filling, end of the filling is called the end diastolic volume. Do I have it here? Okay, so basically that it doesn't eject it all out. It will eject only a fraction. It will eject about 60% of the blood out. And that basically gives the heart some range that that if we need to eject more, the heart has the capacity of doing that. Let me see. So here, don't need to worry about this one here. Let's move on to this one here. So basically here is some important like quantity commonly used to describe the heart. One is called the end diastolic volume. This one is that how during the this is the atrium, this is ventricle, that when the heart feel the blood, the largest amount that heart can feel, the blood can fill into the ventricle, this end diastolic volume. And then another one is called shock volume, that when it's squeezed, when it squeezed out of the blood, how much is squeezed out. So that's a feeling. Shock volume is each time when it's squeezed, how much is squeezed out. And then the remaining part is the end systolic volume. And the ejection is that this squeeze out this shock volume. It's called shock volume divided by the end diastolic volume. How much is squeezed out? Any questions? So basically that let me quickly summarize it. That we learned that here during each cardiac cycle, we have this atrium, we have this ventricle. And during the diastole, blood going in all the way into the ventricle, but because outside pressure is large, this pressure is large, BP is about 120 to 80. And so that pressure is large, so it will close this valve, make it close. So then this heart can feel blood. Then following that is the atrium contraction, squeeze another 20%, ventricle contraction. When ventricle contract, it will first close this valve, and then it will squeeze a portion of it out. So this one is called stroke volume. Overall, this amount to be stored is called end diastolic volume. So basically that during the diastole, the end of it is called the end diastolic volume. The one that got stroke squeezed out is called stroke volume. Then it will squeeze it out. This amount of blood will be squeezed out into the body. So that basically summarizes it. This one basically is a transition from the action potential into the muscle contraction into the stroke volume. The key here is the stroke volume because the stroke volume is the one that provide blood to the entire body. That is what it counts because what's remain here doesn't really matter because it's not pumping it out. But what's more important is what's pumped out. That's the stroke volume. And if we don't have the atrium contraction, we still have the feeling. It's just not that feel that much. However, when ventricle contract, that stroke volume is still good enough to provide the body function. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Rex, how about you? Did you get it?
Yeah, I think I got it, yeah.
Okay, good.
How does the heart murmur affect this?
Heart murmur is usually that valve. So the question is that, I really like your question. You have a lot of questions.
That means the valve's leaky, right?
Yes. So that when it squeezes, ideally it will close this valve first. If not, let me use another color. That means it's pathological condition. So this one. So when it squeezes, when we have this one closed, Rex?
Yes.
Yes. So this one's supposed to close. And then blood have only one outlet to go into the body. However, for the murmuring is that this one doesn't close because this one is, if I may, that this one has this one is one side opened valve. And if it's leak, if it doesn't close, if it closes, you hear a very clear sound, to close it. But if it's not, then blood going back here. When blood going back here, you will have a lot portion of blood going to the atrium, maybe 50% go to the atrium, 50% go to the body. In fact, the majority will go to the atrium because atrium is connected to what?
The aorta.
Atriums connect to the vein. So if it's, right, body has blood from the vein going to the atrium, going to the ventricle. So atrium has the vein. Vein has a very low blood pressure, very low BP.
Mhm.
And in contrast, this aorta has very high BP. So when you have two outlets, one has low pressure, the other one has high pressure, will blood go into the atrium or will blood go into the aorta?
Atrium.
Atrium. It's very bad because the person will not have enough shock volume and the blood pressure will drop very badly. And that drop will cause no blood to go into the brain because you need to have a certain pressure to push the blood into the brain. So the person will have brain death after that. And so
Brain dead?
yeah, if you don't have enough blood going to the brain, you first will be very dizzy, like low blood pressure. And if that is severe enough, there's no blood to provide into the brain. Because remember, the brain is a rigid structure. So here is the neck, this is the head, the body. Brain is a rigid structure. We have the skull. So that you need to, the blood going to the brain has to be high enough in order to push it into the brain. That's why here we have the carotid artery to detect the blood pressure. If it's too low, it's fatal, and it will need to send signal into the heart to increase the heart rate, increase the blood pressure.
All from a heart murmur?
Yes, heart murmur is just a sign.
Wow.
It's a sign. In the beginning, that leakage will be minor. It will be a little bit leakage, and the blood still going to the body. But if it's getting worse, anyway. Yes.
And it gets so if you have a heart murmur, oh sorry.
Heart murmurs are really common, aren't they?
You say it's common?
Yes, aren't they fairly common in people?
I won't say so. I don't think it's that common though, because that means that valve has some damage. And I will say that is the process of the heart disease. Because let me see if we actually going to talk about valve. Let me see. Here, let's talk about this one first. So this is the valve. This is the AV valve. And the valve actually has connection of this tendon with the muscle, the heart muscle. So if you have heart damage, this valve will have one line broken first, the second line broken first, then following that, and then you will have the murmur because there will be leakage. So in the beginning, it's only cause some leakage, and that will make this cardiac output to become, or stroke volume to become decreased.
Now, how do some people outgrow murmurs? Because you know how doctors say that a lot of people who have murmurs, they outgrow them.
Outgrow them, I don't know that.
Yeah, I've heard that like if kids are born with them, usually within the first 5 years of life, it will shut on its own most times.
Okay.
If not, then they go in and surgically repair it.
It's because the heart grows thicker. Like it's really small when they're little.
Okay. So that's that. So that leads to this shock volume and the cardiac output. Shock volume is each time that how much blood squeezes out. So this equation is very important. Excuse me. Shock volume times heart rate. So each time blood squeezes out, that's shock volume. And times how much times in a minute, that's the heart rate. And so this is cardiac output. And the cardiac output is important to provide the blood. So if the person needs blood, it has two ways to ask blood to provide it. One is to squeeze more blood out, or it increase the heart rate. Either way, we will have more blood to coming out of the heart. So this equation, overall, I think this term is stroke volume and the cardiac output is the most important measure from the heart, and also the heart rate. Yeah. Let me see. Frank's starting mechanism is that the more blood going to the heart, the more shock volume will be provided. So that the blood going to the heart is called venous return. So we have the atrium, we have the ventricle. Atrium has blood going in. This is vein. This is the shock volume. Shock volume. The more going back, the more it push out. And how can we increase the venous return if your blood pressure is low? The way to increase the venous return is to move your muscle. So our muscle, our body, our leg. Say you sit for a long time, then there will be less blood going out because a lot of blood remain in the vein. They stay in the lower portion of the body. If you move, if you walk, or if you run, you will squeeze this blood going back to the heart. It will increase the venous return, increase the shock volume. And that's why that after, say, running a marathon or something, when you finish your exercise, it will be recommended that you walk for a while because you need to move your muscle in order to continuing your venous return, in order to continuing your blood output, like shock volume. Any questions?
How does crossing, like when you're gonna get someone's blood pressure, how does crossing their legs affect their blood pressure?
Okay, crossing the leg. So the question is that when you measure the blood pressure, when you measure it here, how is that crossing the leg? Because here is BP, right? Blood pressure. Blood pressure is affected by two things. One is the cardiac output, which is equal to shock volume times heart rate. Means that each time if your heart rate increase, you have more blood to pump it out, or your stroke volume each time it squeezed out is high. Overall, your cardiac output is high. And the higher blood coming out will cause your blood pressure increase. So that's one thing, one portion. That's clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other portion of the blood pressure is called vascular resistance. So that is the vein, the vessel resistance. So if say your heart push the blood out and coming back.
Looks good.
All right, sorry. That way. So it push it out, coming back. If it's all very smooth, then there will be less pressure. But if you squeeze it, then your pressure will increase. It makes sense, right? If you have the tube and it's water going through it, but you squeeze it, then it will increase the pressure. Does that make sense, Rex?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, I get, all right.
Yeah, so if you cross your leg, you put basically squeeze your vein because your vein is very tendon. It's not very like the shape cannot be maintained just by itself.
Right.
If you cross it, you squeeze it, and you will make the resistance increase, and that will make your blood pressure increase. Any other questions?
I can't
So I
think
have
of
a
any right
question.
now.
Sure, sure.
Okay, so then say if someone's working out
Yes.
and all of a sudden they get lightheaded,
Yes.
would that have something to do with the blood flow, or is it like other factors that can contribute to that?
Lightheaded referred is a sign of low blood pressure.
Okay. Okay.
So if you don't have the blood going to the brain, so your blood pressure is low. And what's the question?
Yeah, that was basically my question. So if you're working out and you get lightheaded and you feel like you're about to collapse or faint or something,
yeah.
Does that have to do with the blood flow? And you're saying it does, right? If you have a
your blood pressure is low. Means that your blood cannot go into the brain. And so the question is that what causes it?
What causes that? Yeah.
What causes that? Okay, let's go back to the blood pressure. Blood pressure has two controlled by these two contributor. One is the cardiac output, the other one is vessel resistance. When you run, your vessel resistance probably will not change that much because your blood flowing, your vessel is opening, that's all good. One thing can change is that the stroke volume, because stroke volume is depending on how much blood going to the heart. So in the beginning, when you start to run, you have all this fluid going back to the heart. So you have very good stroke volume. But say you run for a long time, what's gonna happen is you are going to lose fluid because you're sweating. When we move muscle, only about 20 to 30% of that effort is going to generate force. A lot of all others generate heat. So we will become hot and we will sweat a lot. And by sweating, you lose fluid. If you don't drink fluid, your body will lose a lot of fluid. And by losing fluid, you will have less venous return. Low venous return will have low stroke volume. With low stroke volume, we'll have low cardiac output and cause low blood pressure.
Oh, okay. That's why they say it's important to drink your water.
That's right, yes. Because you need to maintain enough fluid in the body to maintain this blood pressure.
Can you say that again? Dehydration causes low venous return, causes low stroke volume, and what was it?
Low stroke volume here, low stroke volume will cause low cardiac output. Low cardiac output will cause low BP, low blood pressure. The blood pressure is measured in the arm, and that low means that there's no, the blood going to the brain, going to the head is also low. Any other questions? If not, I think that is it. Shall we? How many slides, more slides? Okay, we have another lots slides. All right, should be fine. Yeah, we will not talk about, okay. Yeah, I will trim this out. I don't want to talk about EKG here because we are not, if we actually doing it in lab, we will talk about it. But since we don't, I will just, so we will talk about valve. Let me quickly talk about valve, then we finish this one today, shall we? Okay, no one say no, I will just do it.
No.
I guess if you're gonna force us.
Okay.
We're here.
I think I have enough material for my summary. I think I'm okay. I think,
Let me finish this one because I want to move on to the next one. So EKG, the remaining
Extra point.
portion, you don't need to worry about that. So basically that valve, as we mentioned before, that valve is important. We have this AV valve that maintains the blood to reserve the blood in the ventricle. And this valve is connected with the heart muscle through this tendon. And if there is heart infarction, then this tendon will be broken. Then there will be blood going back. This blood going back has a term called regurgitation, but I don't think we mentioned it here, right? Here. So here. So if we have the papillary muscle rupture, we have the valve murmuring, and it will cause the blood. It's called regurgitation. Basically, that blood will come in from the ventricle into the. So here is the atrium. This is the ventricle. So if this valve cannot close, blood will go into the atrium. This one is called regurgitation, and that will cause two things. Very quickly, just 2 minutes, I will finish it. One is that if this is the right atrium, right ventricle, if blood going here, it will go into where?
Veins.
Veins, good. This vein, if it's right, this vein is what? Which vein?
Is that the vena cava?
Vena cava.
Vena cava. Vena cava connect to the body. So
Yeah.
this one is the body vein.
Okay.
Body vein, blood going into the body vein, this person will have swelling.
Okay.
Because all this fluid is going to your arm, your body, your leg, and the person will, it was thin, it will become swelling.
Is that like their feet will be swollen?
Yes,
And
yes.
Yeah, there's, okay.
Yes. So right. And if it's left vein, left ventricle, and left atrium, if it's left, then it will go into the left
Artery.
sorry.
Artery.
No, left vein go into the artery, right? But left atrium.
The pulmonary.
Pulmonary, that's right, pulmonary. So pulmonary vein going to the left atrium. If there is a regurgitation here, blood going to the left atrium, then going to the pulmonary circulation. This one will cause pulmonary.
The pulmonary edema or something.
Edema, that's right, because fluid gonna fill inside of the lung. So that is the valve problem that can cause the body edema, body swelling, or the pulmonary edema, depending on whether it's left side or right side or left side. So that's this one here, regurgitation. It may cause the pulmonary edema. That is it. Good?
Okay.
Good. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a nice
Sounds good.
Thanks, Professor.
All right.